Hello, and welcome to A Postdoc's Journal, the show that takes you through my journey into and eventually out of academia as a postdoctoral research scientist. My name is Simit Patel. Thank you very much for joining me, and for those of you who are new to the show, welcome. Each week what I do is I read out entries from my own personal journal from around 12 years ago, back when I was working in academia as a research scientist, as a postdoc. Then I reflect on it, I share my thoughts with the benefits of 12 years of hindsight. If you are a student or a postdoc or just someone struggling in academia, or perhaps you've already left academia and you're still trying to make sense of the world outside of academia, I hope that sharing my personal experience with you helps you to feel a little bit less alone. In today's episode, we jump to the middle of March 2012. I was at the airport, which is actually where I end up doing most of my journaling these days, is when I'm traveling. I get a little pocket of time, a bit of downtime at the airport just before I board a plane. And that's where I tend to sit down and do a lot of writing. And it looks like I was doing this back in 2012 as well. I must have been on my way back to the UK, I think. I can't really specifically remember what for. I might have been tying up some loose ends from my PhD or something. I had to submit the final book-bound version or something like that. But as you'll see at this point in time, I wasn't having the best time with my new postdoc, and I wasn't really, I would say, in a happy place at this point. So please have a listen to the reading, and I'll be back at the end to share some thoughts with the benefits of 12 years of hindsight. Enjoy. "17th March 2012. At the airport, waiting for a flight home this weekend. A good time to pause and reflect. Work has been tougher for several reasons. And I've been feeling very depressed lately too. The work-life balance has certainly shifted to the bad side. So I've been trying to get these rad tags to work in the lab. Everything has been going wrong. It's embarrassing. It's like it was when I started my PhD, like when I was trying to get the simplest restriction digest to work, and it didn't. It was obvious to me then that my lack of experience was the problem. I feel like I was never properly trained how to do anything in the lab. I've always just been left alone to get on with it. But now I actually have experience, lots of it. How can I still be making such stupid errors? My natural instinct, my knee-jerk reaction to negative results is that it's my fault. I did something wrong. There is something wrong with my technique, and I got the protocol wrong, or I misunderstood something. Perhaps this is just me being overly negative. But it does seem like everything I do in the lab just doesn't work. I tried a simple DNA extraction. It didn't work. An ethanol precipitation. It didn't work. I had hoped this excessive failure in the lab was behind me. But I'm really starting to doubt that's where my talents lie. I've never really been that good in the lab, not really. Others seem to be way more successful than me. I don't really have other talents in other areas though. My statistics is rubbish and I know fuck all about computers. I feel like I'm down at the level of the students, making student level mistakes. I had to work last weekend because there was a lot of pressure to get this Chironomus library prepared. That has spun me out a little bit. Not having a weekend has really fried my brain. I've been trying to write this paper too, with my boss. taking some other students' work and repackaging it into a paper. I spend every morning feeling depressed, probably just tiredness and my body chemistry. I've never really worked like this before, so I'm out of my depth again. My boss suggests things and I just say yes. We had a meeting with the collaborator the other day. The collaborator was arguing with my boss and venturing opinions. I felt like I should be doing the same, but I just stayed silent. The problem is, I don't know enough to have any opinions. I don't even understand the problem. I don't really know how all these formulas and things work. I don't understand statistics. I'm completely incompetent. I feel like a yes man. And I think my boss is starting to realize that. My boss does this thing where he has an opinion about everyone. Whenever he talks about someone, he always gives a little analysis of them. This is person X, they are good with computers. This is person Y, she's not very good in the lab. I wonder and dread to think his analysis of me. Doesn't produce results, not a strong team player, doesn't know what he's doing, too agreeable. I just feel like I'm underperforming at the moment, in the lab and out of the lab. I went to this English-German Stammtisch the other day, and another expat brunch thing a couple of weeks ago. I met some people, but I started to feel really down when I was around the table. I felt like I was mixing with people I had no interest in spending time with. I found it really tiresome expending all that energy telling people about myself again. I'm getting really sick of having to explain my story to people and having to fake smile and pretend to be happy. It's exhausting and painful for my face. It's energy I don't have to spare. I'm starting to get really impatient with niceness now. I have nothing in common with these people. It's not the social life I want. I want friends my own age and in a similar place in their life. I want friends who share my interests, music, Formula One, cooking, having a drink. I really hope I get my mojo back after this break in the UK. Okay, thank you very much for listening to that. As usual, I've written down some thoughts after reading that and hearing that back. This one actually felt a lot darker, I've got to say. I didn't feel all that comfortable reading this one and revisiting this one again. I couldn't really find anything I was too nostalgic about or felt... I didn't find anything to laugh about with this one, really. There was nothing to really chuckle about. But let's see how I feel after going through it. Before we get into the reflection, I want to ask you a quick question. Do you ever worry about your paper being rejected because the English isn't good enough? One thing I've always been good at is writing, but I know not everyone finds that easy. Perhaps English isn't your first language, or for some reason, the words you write just don't quite capture what you want to say. Good English can enhance your scientific credibility, increase the chance of your article being accepted, and speed up the peer review process. Whether you're a research scientist, a scientific writer, or part of a dynamic biotech company, I want to help you with my professional copy editing and proofreading services for scientific English. Enhancing the clarity and precision of writing has been an integral part of my professional life in academia and in the biotech industry for over a decade. If you need a native English speaker with a solid scientific background and a professional certification in proofreading to refine and polish your writing, I would love to help you. Please visit simitpatel.com, that's simitpatel.com for more information. Thank you, and now back to the show. I mentioned the word depression a couple of times, and I want to make one thing very clear. I do not have full-blown clinical depression. I've never been diagnosed with that. This is mainly my sort of slightly ignorant and clumsy use of the word depressed from my side. So if you or someone you know is actually suffering from actual clinical depression, then I'm very sorry if I misused that word or I didn't mean to trivialize it or belittle it. 12 years ago, I was very uneducated about depression and mental health in general. Now, it's true I do get very low sometimes, and it does come over me like a dark cloud and just stays with me for a couple of days or weeks sometimes. This entry is an example of the sorts of things that run through my mind when I'm in that sort of state. More recently, I have worked with a couple of therapists, and I was given a diagnosis of depression and anxiety symptoms. But that's not full-blown clinical depression. I understand that. I understand that now. I do experience those symptoms sometimes, but it doesn't stop me from, doing my job or functioning in general in life. So what I was experiencing then and what I still experience now sometimes is not nothing. It's real. My emotions were real, but I think my 26-year-old self was perhaps misusing the word depression a little bit back then, so my apologies if I've offended anyone with that. A quick biology explainer. I mentioned a few technical terms like rad tags, restriction digest, DNA extractions, ethanol precipitation, sequencing libraries, and things like that. You don't need to know what any of that means. This is not a science podcast where I explain the scientific terms. This is more about my emotional journey, not my scientific knowledge. But all you really need to know is that those are molecular biology techniques. Those are things that people in white lab coats do in the lab. And it's mainly pipetting one small bit of clear liquid from one test tube into another test tube. And then you spin it around or you heat it up or you cool it down. That's all it is. But you don't really need to know what those biology terms actually mean. In general, I think a theme here is that I was being pretty hard on myself. I seem to have this belief where I've never, ever been good in the lab and everything I do in the lab just doesn't work. And it's because of me. It's because I'm the problem. This got me thinking about negative bias and how negative bias works. So our brains are constantly scanning the environment for danger and trying to predict possible problems and causes of those problems. So we're very much hardwired to focus on negative things. It's another one of those survival mechanisms we have from sort of ancestral times when we were evolving that actually just makes us thoroughly miserable in the modern age today. So we have this natural tendency to focus on evidence that supports the negative, the worst case scenario. And we experience the impact of the negativity much stronger than positive reinforcement. And I think that's what was happening here. Things weren't going well in the lab, so I treated that as evidence to support that belief. My DNA extraction not working, for example, was supporting that worst case scenario that everything I do in the lab doesn't work, and the reason why is me. Now, in that process, you end up ignoring a lot of the other actual evidence, and you end up not really rationalizing things in the way they should be rationalized. So the reality is I was able to get lots and lots of DNA extractions and restriction digests and PCRs, etc. done very successfully in the lab. Throughout the course of my PhD and my postdoc combined, probably several tens of thousands of samples I was able to process with my hands, my skills, my knowledge. And even during my PhD, I actually figured out some pretty complex problems in the lab. And I even helped others with my knowledge and my experience. I did have problems too, but that's the thing. My negative bias was just focusing on those problems and when things were going wrong. And then that supported my belief that I'm totally incompetent and useless in the lab. And I wasn't really able to rationalize things, so I didn't really look at it from the perspective of, well, the type of samples I was working with in the lab are inherently difficult to work with. The sorts of species of animals I was working with had lots of properties that made it difficult to do DNA extractions and things like that. So I wasn't really bringing in the full evidence and rationalizing it in a fair way. I was just focusing on the negatives because that's how our brains are hardwired to operate. I was being pretty harsh on myself about being a yes man, as I put it. So in other words, I was just being too agreeable.
I even went on to say that I was completely incompetent, which is pretty harsh. This was another belief. I have no original ideas, I'm too agreeable, I can't come up with any ideas of my own, and this is what makes me totally incompetent and an absolute failure. That was the belief I had. And again, my negative bias was just seeing my performance in this one meeting and using that as evidence to support that belief. And therefore it must be true. I started to believe it because I saw the evidence for it. Now, this one might be true to some extent. I am a very agreeable person. And one thing I realized about myself later on in my academic journey, and if you stick with me through these episodes, we'll get to that point, is I was very much working on other people's ideas, not my own ideas. And I wasn't really having any of my own ideas. But at the time, I saw that as a failing. It was a bad thing. That was me not being a good academic because I couldn't come up with things. I wish I saw that in a more positive light, like I do today. I understand that about myself now, that I'm a good individual contributor. I'm a good employee to have. It's not about my creativity necessarily, it's about executing a plan. And that's what I'm good at. I wish I learned to see that as a strength, and I could focus that on areas where I could have the most value, the most impact. But at the time, I just saw it as me being an out-and-out failure. I think in this journal entry as well, I started to touch on what I think of as more general problems in academia. I said something about others seem to be more successful than me. But the truth is, I have no idea how good anyone actually was in the lab. Research at PhD and postdoc level is very isolating. Everyone is basically off on their own, doing their own thing. And for all I know, my level of success was a normal level of success. Plus, it's not really a valid comparison. Other people in the lab could be working on different things, very different problems, different techniques, different species, different tissue types, and so on. So it's not really a valid comparison. With the way we're trained, particularly in the PhD, you're told that your work is supposed to be independent research, which inherently means no one else can really interfere with your work and you can't interfere with other people's work. That's not okay. So that already creates this sort of isolationist way of working. If I could have taken the same samples, the same reagents, etc., and given it to someone else in the lab or to someone else in another lab, another postdoc, someone I trusted, if I could just say to them, could you just run these samples for me and see what results you come up with? If they had come back with the same sort of failed results that I had, I could then rule out me as being the issue. There could be a technical issue here, something in the sample, something in the reagents. It could be something about the tissue I'm working with. There's a methylation or a cryptic polysaccharide or something in my samples that's inhibiting whatever. And of course, if they came back with some successful results, then that could be great because I could ask them to show me what they did so that I could know what I was doing wrong and learn from that. But the problem is there's no culture of that in the workplace. Doing your work in that sort of helpful way for other people just doesn't exist because your work has to be your work. And that's what forces us to work in this isolationist way. I think in general in academia as well, there's this underlying level of competition. Even if you're not a competitive person, you are forced into this competitive situation where you're competing for grants, you're competing with other manuscripts to get published in a good journal. You're competing for jobs that you apply for. It's super competitive. And you inevitably end up comparing yourself to others. That's just something that happens in the process. Or even worse, others end up comparing you to others, and then that gets really in your head, as it did with me. Another thing in academia that doesn't sit well with me is using students as data slaves. That's an actual term we used to use. We used to call them data slaves. So this is like project students or master students. You get them in to do a bit of work. They use that experience to help them get a degree, and they, think they get something out of it, and they do. Then once they leave, you kind of take their data, you take their samples, you do something with them, and then you turn it into a paper where you're the first author. And you can, of course, have them on the paper as an acknowledgement, or you can put them in the list of authors, fine. But you publish it as if it is your research. Now, throughout my postdoc, this happened quite a lot. I got to see this from the perspective of someone who's higher up on the academic ladder, as a postdoc in this case. I was higher up the ladder and in a position to basically exploit students. Now, I'm guilty of this. I actually did this. A lot of the papers I ended up publishing were the result of the previous work the students have done. And yes, you could argue that this is all about collaboration. That's what collaboration is, everyone working as a team. But I really felt I was taking credit for other people's work. And I think the bit that's sad about it is I don't think the students realize that they are being exploited. It's like they are grateful to be there. They're grateful to get the experience. They know it's going to help them because they can get what they want from it, which is a degree and putting it on their CV. But they don't realize that the people higher up the ladder, the PIs, the postdocs, they are looking at them, knowingly exploiting them for their own personal gain. And that's the subtle thing, is the fact that the students don't realize that they're being thought of that way and being put in that position. There's something about that just doesn't really align with my values. It's one of the reasons I'm glad I'm not in that system anymore. One thing that stood out to me in this entry was anger, and the anger I started to feel at the time. And I was taking that anger out largely at myself, but also on the expats, the other people I met up with on these expat meetup events. I wasn't angry towards them, but I would think very angry things about them, and I would feel angry and feel this emotion of anger. So I want to talk about anger a little bit. So anger is a protective emotion. Some line is crossed, anger kicks in to defend yourself. In the ancestral environment, this was for survival in threatening situations. So the question is, what was the threat? What was the line that was being crossed? What was my anger defending? In terms of what my anger was defending, I think it was my own well-being. I was protecting the low amount of physical energy I had left. I was so burnt out from working weekends, all the mental energy that goes into it. I had no energy left to socialize. But rather than realizing that my fuel gauge was empty and I needed to fill it up again, I just kept powering through on the tiny reserve of energy I had. So when this thing comes along, this socializing with random expats, to take the small reserve of energy that I had left, I get angry because I need to defend that small amount of energy I have left. And I got angry at those expats. I'm angry at these people I was trying to be friends with. And I was trying to stop these people from taking that little bit of energy that I had left in my fuel tank. But anger, being somewhat unfocused and wild, it just ends up lashing out at people and everything else. And maybe that's why I was so angry and harsh on myself. There's almost a sort of wisdom in this kind of behavior, this anger. It's like my subconscious knows that I don't want these stress levels. And inside, I know that I want to be calm and at peace. So to try to guarantee that, my subconscious deployed my anger to defend against this thing that was threatening that.
So there you have it. I think that this entry captured quite a lot of the things that I was and still am a little unhappy about in academia as a working environment. But maybe it's changed now. Maybe it's better these days. You tell me. I actually do feel a bit better having gone through all of that. I think one thing that's clearer to me now is that what we think of as negative emotions actually come from a place of self-care in a way. You know, it's anger is there for protection, to protect you. Fear is there to keep you safe. Now, the effects and consequences of these emotions can be quite negative and very damaging, very hurtful to other people and to yourself. But that's ultimately just you or your subconscious trying to be safe and protected and to be happy. In the next episode, we jump to a couple of weeks later. I'm struggling with some similar topics that we've talked about already today, but I end up having a bit of a change of heart, and I think maybe that trip to the UK did help me get my mojo back. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope this was valuable for you in some way. And until next week, please be kind to yourself and have a great week.
Brood about it, brood until the day, one day I will find the words to say.
Thanks again for listening to A Postdoc's Journal. I've been your host, Semit Patel. If you've enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others who you think might find it helpful and interesting. You could also leave a review over at Podchaser or on Apple Podcasts. If you can relate to anything in this episode, or if you have your own take on this journal entry, I would love to hear from you. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Blue Sky. Links to all my social media are in the show notes. Thanks again.